And hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today. This is another Newsflash episode on the show. Some big moves today by Biden in China. They're aimed to prevent American help to Beijing as it modernizes its military and escalate a conflict between the world's two largest economies. We're going to try and break that down. Also, the results are in on the proxy abortion referendum in Ohio and the effort to change the rules of constitutional amendments so that they need 50 or 60% of the vote to pass rather than 50 plus 1 failed pretty disastrously in Ohio. Also, we're taking a look at rising tensions among the United Auto Workers as they prepare for a big strike, possibly with the Stellantis manufacturer of electric cars up there in Detroit. And we'll take a look at some of the fear setting in from some of those big CNBC guys. Also, we're going to break down some of the really horrific stuff that we have seen coming out of Texas lately with regards to immigration, and specifically those horrific-looking buoys that they have put out there to end the show today. We got a good one for you as always. It's Newsflash. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, so we start today with China. This is in the New York Times here. President Biden escalated his confrontation with China on Wednesday by signing an executive order banning American investments in key technology industries that could be used to enhance Beijing's military capabilities in the latest of a series of moves, putting further distance between the world's two largest economies. Again, really kind of an effort to take what was largely kind of a nonchalance policy and kind of just a very chill, just like kind of let it happen type of stance with regards to China under Obama, really taking Trump's approach way more seriously, taking, with the vibe and the mindset of, we gotta take on China, we gotta attack on China, we gotta, escalate, we gotta try and stifle their economy in any way possible. And honestly, I don't think this is really with regards to so much the competition, obviously the ongoing competition between whether Democrats or Republicans or anything like that, because clearly, you got Biden and Trump, two diametrically opposed candidates coming in and saying you're going to keep doing the same thing. This is definitely something that is, any American politician would do because the market forces are afraid. They are not liking the way things are going. They know that we are trending down and China is trending up, and people, I say that a lot. People always accuse me, oh, you love China. But looking at this logically, China is on the way up. We are on the way down. Looking at it just cold, hard, take all your kind of, red, white, and blue colored glasses off. We got to look at the facts here. And that is that there is something that, if we're trying to say number one, which I don't necessarily think that we should do, China is going to be the biggest threat. So we need to do anything in our power to take them down, to marshal them down, even if it leads to a potential confrontation of some kind, God forbid. The order will prohibit venture capital and private equity firms from pumping money into China's efforts to develop semiconductors and other microelectronics, quantum computers, and certain artificial intelligence applications. Administration officials stressed that the move was tailored to guard national security, but China is likely to see it as part of a wider campaign to contain its rise. And the question is, how much, we saw this with the kind of beginning of the Ukraine war, is how much can China create its own economy in it for itself? How much can they say, we don't need you, we can build our own sectors, we can make our own connections. I think their access to, the kind of fine print, they got a lot of the raw materials there in Taiwan, but to really make those all important computer chips, they have had their access limited by U.S. actions and pressure that they put on, I believe, a Dutch company. So it's really kind of a problem for them. But in terms of development, in terms of figuring out a way to solve problems, it's like which government do we think right now is better at solving problems, the Americans or the Chinese? I think I know which one I'm going to bet on. And you could I can hear people right now getting mad at me, but it's like let's look at the last 5 to 10 years and tell me why that's not the smart money. You can't. The Biden administration is committed to keeping America safe and defending America's national security through appropriately protecting technologies that are critical to the next generation of military innovation, the Treasury Department said in a statement. The statement emphasized the executive order was a narrowly targeted action complementing existing export controls, that the administration maintained its long-standing commitment to open investment, which is going to, if they try and roll back on that, that's going to spook a lot of big corporations who rely quite heavily on the market in China. It's going to be interesting because obviously the big part of, again, because we talked about, can they create this alternative economy? Can they find the ways to, work around this? Can they find the ways to get, their resources taken care of? But the question is, how much is, because a lot of, ever since World War II, our military, our economy has been in large part structured by the military as kind of this just ever productive, ever, required engine to really spur a lot of, industry. It's always been a very, well looked after industry as well. And it's been a pretty essential part of our economy. And I think that is, could that just be an us thing? Could that just be a thing that isn't required for, it's required for all great powers to a certain extent, but, how much more does China need to go, and what kind of tact will they take? Will they fall into the American trap where there just seems to be, a lot of graft, a lot of inability to get stuff done in an efficient way, a lot of very, just incredibly inefficient spending, or will they be able to make more with less? Because if you look at the way, the massive amounts of waste, fraud, and abuse that we see in the American military on a daily basis, all throughout all sectors, it's just pretty much all comprehensive. It's hard to, it's pretty easy actually to see that there is some room for improvement. There's some, juice to be squeezed out of that. And it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Chinese will be able to, fall out of that trap, because there was they already have a pretty extensive bureaucracy, and expanding the military in a certain way, spending money on pretty, foolish products for the benefit of these defense contractors rather than the benefit of the actual military, all things that we are definitely guilty of. There may be problems that are a little bit easier to avoid for the Chinese, but it's certainly, not worth counting out the fact that they are very much liable to fall into that kind of trap, for certain. But the narrow or not, the new order comes at perhaps the most fraught moment in the U.S.-China relationship since Richard M. Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger opened a dialogue with Beijing in the early 1970s. A series of expanding export controls on key technologies to China has already triggered retaliation from Beijing, which recently announced a cutoff of metals like gallium that are critical for the Pentagon's own supply chain. And honestly, do I think China's going to invade Taiwan? I don't. I think the much more likely scenario is, at the worst in terms of violence, it's something like Hong Kong, where they don't really need to send a lot of Chinese troops in. They just have, a loyal government there and are able to kind of, get it over. Because obviously that is going to be the major front that there's any sort of economic kind of confrontation on. But I feel like with the way I see it, much more like a situation where there's, ties to the government that is going to be, kind of built up over time, and it's going to be much more of a long process where there's going to be, I think it's going to be much more of a heavily more carrot as opposed to stick process. If you're judging by China's past, maybe with a little bit of a stick coming at the end, like they did with Taiwan, but that's almost really the only, war situation right now. Obviously can't predict the future. Very easy to possibly see something jump out at you. For sure that, you can't foresee really. But I think it is definitely clear that they are not going to be, hopping in there any second invading, as much as the U.S. would like to think that they are. But I think what could be a much more the bigger problem, what the United States is really concerned about, is getting more direct competition with China, eating up more of the industries, modernizing the military, that can really kind of go head to head, and how they modernize versus how the United States modernized from that kind of government run kind of mindset versus the heavily public-private partnership mindset of the United States. It's going to be very, very interesting to see. Biden has said that he wants to stabilize relations with China following a Cold War-style standoff over a spy balloon shot down after crossing through American airspace and the discovery of a broad Chinese effort to put malware into power grids and communications systems. He sent Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other officials to reopen communications in recent months. Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, is expected to go to China in the coming weeks. Administration officials have argued that they are acting with a prudence that should have been exercised around key technologies years ago. So definitely something to keep an eye on. But bottom line here is tensions are growing. All right, we will continue to follow that story for sure. But now on to the next. All right, so we go to our next story here. And that is the Ohio results are in. It was a pretty big swing. Obviously, this is the abortion vote, but not really the abortion vote. In November, they have this referendum about abortion on the ballot in the fall. They are essentially kind of saying that the Ohio Republican kind of super majority legislature, or heavily Republican majority, is in control of Ohio. They essentially said, why don't we put on the ballot now this referendum that says in order to amend the Constitution, in order for ballot referendums to pass, it has to be 60%, not 50% of the vote approving. Well, that ballot referendum, which was widely viewed and openly said by the yes side on this, the Republican side on this, and Democrats with the no side on this, essentially, that it was openly said that they wanted to raise this to 60 in order to fend off the upcoming abortion vote. So, how did they do? Well, they lost pretty badly. Something like 60-40 was the split. 56.5 to 43.5, roughly 2.8 million votes dwarfed the 1.66 million ballots counted in the state's 2022 primary elections, in which races for governor, Senate, and House were up for grabs. The contest was widely seen as a test of Republicans' efforts to nationwide to curb the use of ballot initiatives and a potential parameter of political change going into the 2024 election. And bottom line on this is, it's always abortion. It's always abortion. It's abortion, stupid. That is what's really coming through quite clear on this. But I do want to go through to this New York Times article by Campbell Robertson, Rachel Richardson, and Daniel McGraw about why this thing failed. It goes, a little after 2 p.m. on Tuesday, David Shranowski, 31, walked into the Knox Presbyterian Church in Cincinnati, pushing his baby daughter in a stroller. He was there to vote on Issue 1, a measure meant to raise the constitutional threshold in order to approve a state constitutional amendment from a simple majority, as most states require, to 60%. It was a change that Mr. Tranowski, an engineer who described his politics as center-right, might have been open to, considering, he said, if that were what it was really about. Everyone kind of knows, said Mr. Tranowski, who along with 57% of Ohio voters cast his ballot against Issue 1. It seemed underhanded. It didn't seem like the way we should conduct our politics. So a really kind of remarkable moment here where we have Ohio, which is a kind of state with much, I would say, by and large, elderly, more wealthier, more, somewhat evangelical, but also a fair share of just, wealthy kind of center-right people, very much like this. It'd be interesting to see who he supports, what he thinks about the Democratic primary. But for months, it has been apparent that Issue 1, advertised as a measure to safeguard the state constitution from wealthy out-of-state interests, was primarily about blocking an abortion rights amendment that will be kept on the November ballot. Supporters of this measure hardly kept this a secret, and campaign donors lined up accordingly. Much of the money came from Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, a Washington-based anti-abortion advocacy group. It's a little bit of a magical trick, said Rebecca Ferris, which is a registered Republican, 74 years old, voted against Issue 1. The people who engineered it have covered it so that you don't really see the cards that are there. It's going to be interesting because, this may even be separate from the people's issues on abortions too. But it really shows that I think there are still, very, very kind of interesting to look at here. There's still a lot of Americans who say this is too far. We can't go too crazy quite yet. And when this comes in a lot of ways. It comes primarily around abortion. We still need to have some sort of good standard on abortion. This is ridiculous. I know people have gotten abortions. It's important to have that right there, even if it's not something I would personally do. It feels like we're losing rights in this country. It feels like we're going backwards. That's a scary feeling that not a lot of people like. Even some registered Republicans, a good chunk of registered Republicans, a significant chunk. But also, there's this level of, hey, wait a minute, slow down. We see what you're doing here, and we don't like it. This seems weird. This seems authoritarian. It seems like you're raising the stakes for our vote to count. I think the Democratic vote no side, which was really kind of filled up with a lot of centrist Republicans, did a pretty good job of advertising that. So for many Ohioans, this barely concealed political strategizing is what clinched their decision to come out and vote against the measure. And come out they did. And it turned out they nearly doubled that of last year's primary election for Congress and the governor's office. It is likely that most of the votes against the referendum reflected the views of people, who saw issue 1 as a threat to abortion rights. That final tally lined up neatly with polling about the abortion rights amendment, which is going to go up in November. This brought people out to vote even in Republican strongholds like Warren County and the Cincinnati suburbs. I'm 89 years old and I'm fed up with old men telling women how to take care of their reproduction and their sex lives, said Thomas McAnanich, a Democrat who cast his vote in the Mason Municipal Center. If men were having babies, there wouldn't be any of this nonsense. Still, more than 36 interviews with voters on Monday and Tuesday revealed a sizable segment of the electorate, and possibly a decisive one, who was offended by the whole effort. People grumbled that this was a disingenuous game or sneaky tactic, and that his backers were trying to pull a fast one. The sentiment was bipartisan, perhaps explaining why the outcome on Tuesday was close in counties that former President Donald J. Trump won by 20 points or more. Several voters interviewed pointed out that only 9 months earlier, Republican lawmakers had outlawed virtually all August elections, arguing they were too expensive and too few voters turned out for them. And they reversed course when it became clear that abortion rights amendment was on its way to the ballot. People here can see through all of that. Yeah, and it really does show that we have had, and ever since 2022, and ever since we've had this kind of continuous rolling back and just things that Republicans seem to take more and more power on the policy level and even on the just governmental political level for themselves. It has really, really become quite an open seat. And people are just, and there's always this kind of this talk, I think, especially in the socialist left, that, people are losing it. They're crazy. America's failing. A lot of people just don't think that, especially a lot of people like these kind of center right to center left, along with, of course, with the Democratic base, these swing voters in Ohio that are, kind of moderate, well-to-do. They are going to be the people that are going to say, hey, let's take actions to keep things going as they should, protect our democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Some of issue 1 supporters did emphasize the principles of protecting the Constitution from wealthy interests or passing political whims, or safeguarding the state against mob rule, as Andrew Hood said on his way out of the Municipal Center in Mason, a 34-year-old. Spencer Gross, a spokesperson for Protect Our Constitution, the main group backing issue 1, said that there had been support for an initiative like this for years, prompted by concerns about other amendments proposed by special interest groups, but acknowledged that this was certainly mired in the November issue, and ultimately that had an impact. Indeed, it seemed to resonate with the measure's outnumbered supporters. Abortion is key, said Virginia Cox, 82, a Republican, on her way to vote for the measure in Claremont County. And again, I think it just comes down to it. Bottom line is, people were completely, they were onto this. They knew what was going on. And, obviously you got to assume it's going to be some of the people who are the most dedicated political followers, people who are, reading their take your pick of Fox News or MSNBC or CNN at night. And they are definitely activated, and they saw what was really going on here, and good for them. They were able to. I think there's definitely a certain quadrant that maybe isn't, the most really gung ho, die hard on abortion, but when it comes down to things like, I don't know, protecting the Constitution, or not protecting the Constitution, but just protecting the, the voice of humans are the voice of just everyday normal people in democracy. Like, that is something that I think pretty much any American, especially a lot of these, centrist type of people in Ohio, the center right, what was that? Rob Portman Republicans, John Kasich Republicans coming out and saying that, I think it's very interesting to look at, how they feel about this, because there are definitely some kind of constituents. That's a constituency I feel like that you can plug into a lot of different parts of the country. Maybe a little bit differently in some places. Each suburban, rapidly leftward trending locale in this country is different, has its own type of concerns, but it is very, very interesting and clear to see that this is definitely a developing issue. And it's definitely going to have a pretty major role for 2024 as well. As Ohio as a whole is not as far as to the right as one might infer from the lopsided Republican margins in its legislature, a function of gerrymandering and the uneven rural-urban distribution of partisanship. Some polling has found that when it comes to specific policies on matters like abortion and gun regulations, Ohio voters may not be as conservative as many of the politicians they vote for. There's a big gap between where people are on issues and where people are on identifying with candidates, says Thomas Sutton, director of the Baldwin-Wallace University Community Research Institute, which conducted a statewide poll on the issues last fall. In focus groups he recently conducted in some of the most solidly Republican parts of the state, Professor Sutton found that the party loyalty did not cancel out a distaste for issue one and the possibility that it could undermine popular will. People were concerned on a couple levels. Number one was you are diminishing my ability to vote on these constitutional issues. And number two was the way in which this was all done. So, yeah, it's very rare that you see people voting kind of on a system issue, on a, protect our democracy issue, especially, would-be Republicans. But, I think these are kind of your mirror image to the resist libs. These are the 12% that have been against Donald Trump for a long time. These are people who, just are kind of much more stuck in the 1990s, if anything. It's very, very interesting to see them having a voice in our political sphere. But I do think it will, even though I'm kind of hinting out, this is a very rare, limited situation, the general backlash to abortion and the general backlash to things going backwards and rights becoming less and less, that is a very widespread, very political potent issue that I think will continue to even play a big role in 2024. All right, next story. We have tensions rising in contract talks between the United Auto Workers Union and Stellantis on Tuesday, when the union president accused the company of seeking concessions in contract talks when the union wants gains as a September strike threat looms. The UAW President Shawn Fain said in a statement that Stellantis has broken a pledge not to seek givebacks on this round of talks, in which the union is seeking more than 40% general pay raises over 4 years, restoration of pensions for newer hires, cost of living increases, and an end to wage tiers, among other benefits. Union spokesperson said singling out Stellantis doesn't mean the UAW has picked a company as a strike target, and it could choose all three. The union's contracts with GM, Ford, and Stellantis all expire at 11:59 p.m., and Fain has told workers they should be willing to go on strike to make major gains. And honestly, if there's any time to do it, the time is now. And there's a very similar thing that happened with the Teamsters, as did UAW. Ray Curry made a very concessionary deal, former president, to GM a few years back. He was kind of ousted. Shawn Fain was put in, and he seems to be much more aggressive. The UAW represents 146,000 workers at the three companies. In the past, the contracts have set the standard for manufacturing wages and benefits for blue-collar jobs nationwide. As the industry it undergoes a historic transformation from the internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. The automakers will need thousands of workers to staff battery plants that are joint ventures with battery companies. The UAW sees this year's contract as a crucial opportunity to ensure representation in the industry's jobs of the future. And again, this is something that really needs to be happening. I think it's probably coming at the best possible point you could want from labor. You had a relatively successful UAW contract, a huge step up from any kind of contract in the past, and definitely something that should be built on, not rested on, resting on your laurels type of deal. And we have seen a whole host of broader, just general support for unions in terms of polling. And also an idea that unions can actually be effective tools for making politics. I think that's been a big point for a lot of these people. some of the UAW workers, former Democrats, bet you, at least in 2016, a good portion of them went to Trump, probably propelled Trump to victory in states like Michigan and Wisconsin and things like that. These kind of Rust Belt former union workers. Michigan more would be the case for Trump, but in 2016, at least for the UAW. And I think it's largely because they have seen a way for politics. They've given up on a way for politics to actually matter to them. It used to matter to them as it was a union candidate to vote for. This person would fight for you. This one would be on your side in negotiation time. That has not been a thing for many, many years. And the way it is, so I think a lot of those people are just like, why not just vote for the guy who makes the people that I don't like mad, the effete liberals mad, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of changed a little bit with, good old working class Joe. But this is, an actual thing. Hey, we can get involved in the union. We can open up the union to not just, a smoke-filled room of, the cigars and all that, but we can actually say, here's how you're going to have an influence on the union. Here's how you can change things. And here's how you can have a voice in a contract that's going to determine a lot about your life for the next 4 years at your place of work. In a Facebook Live appearance, Fain clearly threatened to strike one or more of the companies. He told the UAW, he's told workers his strike fund is healthy and leadership has a plan for a work stoppage come September 14th. If these companies don't deliver, they're going to see this plan unfold. Fain said the bargainers are making progress, but he's been shocked to see Stellantis' list of demands. The company, he said, wants to be able to punish workers for missing work and has proposed additional tiers of wages and is seeking to cut existing medical coverage. It also wants changes in the profit-sharing formula and cuts in 401k contributions. Management chose to spit in our faces, he said. Top-scale production workers at the companies make about $32 per hour. And the companies have said it's much higher when benefits and bonuses are added in. Ford, for instance, says in a statement that benefits and bonuses push the yearly package value to about $112,000. Again, subject to change there, given that it's coming from Ford. Merrick Masters, a business professor at Wayne State, says there is a deep friction between the union and Stellantis, especially over scheduling that can require workers to be on the job 12 hours a day for 7 days a week. It doesn't surprise me the tension between these two parties, but I wouldn't read more into it than that. I don't think that it means Stellantis is the likely target in bargaining and possibly for a strike. A message was left Tuesday seeking comment from Stellantis, but there has been no clear indication that they will not seek concessions here. But it's going to be, again, another big test, and it's so critical because they are definitely more EV-focused for sure. That Stellantis is. So they're going to really have to organize. They're going to have to fight here, and they're going to have to at least get their foot in the door when it comes to stopping this decline. Because especially as hopefully we move towards more EVs, hopefully less big EVs, more small EVs. Just kind of a personal preference of mine because they also could tend to be more affordable, but it's a whole different story. But this needs to be done with union labor if we're really to have any hope of a solid manufacturing base and union labor in our country. We cannot have these jobs just being tossed down the drain, whether it be to places around the world where those people work in even less conditions, or whether it be here where they're working. It's the equivalent of like a meat packing job, and these jobs are going to become less and less valuable to quality. Just the if they are that quality, what is that impact is that going to have on society? How is that going to affect our general economy? How is that going to make those places where those factories are even more run down? It's just going to be, I think, a pretty disastrous situation to say the least. Here, let's go to this from Jim Cramer talking about this. Here's what he had to say on CNBC, the boss's channel, when it came to the UAW strike.
The trucks and the incredible Facebook performance by Sean Fain yesterday, where he just called the Stellantis offer trash. We're going to have,
he threw it in the trash.
When we start talking about the presidential election, I think the biggest strike our country has had in years, which is the UAW.
You think that's going to happen?
Yeah.
You don't think Gene Sperling can talk both sides off of ledges?
No, Gino can't do it because this guy who runs the UAW reminds me of Earl Browder. I mean, he's like a longshoreman union. The stevedores.
Well, today's the 100th day of the writers on strike.
Right.
And that rhetoric isn't cooling down after Friday's apparently failed meeting.
No, I mean, look, these things matter tremendously. The auto strike is going to, I have Dana on tonight.
When
Not
would that
Zool. I don't have. I have Zool
September
on tomorrow.
14th
Dana
is the
tonight.
contract.
September 14th. But the fellow who's running it is just going around telling. Like, if you walked in there, he would tell you. I mean, he says horrible things. He's talking about a kleptocracy. That the people who own these stocks are just bad people. I mean, Americans own these. I mean, it's like it's in your 401k.
Yeah, I haven't been focused.
Oh, you've got to focus on this guy.
All right.
This guy is just. He was made for our show.
We should bring him on.
Oh, I want him on. Sean Fain, I think he should be like a co-host. He is so electric. He is third rail. He is using rhetoric that Elizabeth Warren would say, keep your mouth shut.
Really?
He's using rhetoric that Elizabeth Warren would say, keep your mouth shut. Well, Elizabeth Warren, let's keep her damn mouth shut and let's get Sean Fain going. Because we need some energy in this country. We need Elizabeth Warren and people like that to be like, no, not too fast. No, we need somebody who's finally not going to take any punches and is going to secure one of the most important industries to at least be on a same level playing field and is not going to play nice about it. Because you could be aggressive, you can win good contracts, but you can really only do it if you have your workers involved, if you have your workers rising up and standing behind you, which is going to be absolutely critical to anything positive down the road in the future for this. But anyway, that is all the time that we have here today. Do apologize. We're going to get to our. Oh no, I apologize. We got to get to our Greg Abbott story because this is just ridiculous, folks. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he has essentially sold these circular saws between the Rio Grande border and buoys to maim or kill anyone who attempts to climb over. 2 bodies have already been found trapped in the floating barrier. So essentially what this is, there's these big massive buoys that people have found, kind of brought up from the shore, and there are these just saws, these very sharp edges. Boys have already. I think one of them was a young boy who's been found already maimed. His body kind of just hanging off of this bench or this big buoy here. Really, really horrific stuff. As they, supposedly try to swim, they claw over the buoys. They think, oh, it's just a metal thing. I can grab onto it. No, it's just all, a saw that's going to cut them open and leave them just to drown bloody in the water. Again, I think this is a purely Governor Greg Abbott production, but it really just reflects how much our country has gone down the drain in terms of any sort of real legitimate immigration enforcement. How much we've want it to be a problem, how much it's become a problem, and how much we've actively done nothing to try and solve the problem. By any sort of means, problem, pathway to citizenship. Making requirements for good work, whatever, checking with people after a certain amount of time, any sort of legitimate, sign of a functioning country essentially that would deal with this problem. But instead, we've just let far right people, who are again completely out of step with the rest of the country, just straight up install murder weapons on our border to keep these people out, and they've done it in a very kind of surreptitious way, but. Again, this is a really perfect example of the absolute depravity of Greg Abbott here. Just essentially, he may as well just put up a moat with alligators in the freaking Rio Grande to keep people out. It's essentially the same thing he is doing here. Really, really horrific stuff. Again, we are short on time, but just wanted to get that story out of the way there. But it is something that obviously deserves a lot more time than that as we continue to cover that and all stories in the future as we return next. So we'll probably have a show for you over the weekend.